So I've been having more questions lately from patients who are concerned with cardiovascular ramifications of shots that they've had recently, dealing with an epidemic we've recently had. So hopefully you understand why I have to speak carefully about this stuff. Anyway, so we're getting people that say, look, I've been reading more and hearing more about potential cardiovascular issues later on down the road once I've had these in me. So I wanted to take a minute and explain to you a couple of things that are available that research has shown should be pretty effective at protecting you against those particular downstream effects. So briefly, let me just say a couple things about the shots. Not everybody's going to have long-term effects from this. Not everybody's going to have any bad side effects of this. Some people will, some people won't. There are a couple of reasons for that. One, we're all individuals. Like a basic principle of functional medicine is biochemical individuality. Every one of us is different. If you give everybody the same medication, we may react a little bit differently to it. It may have its desired effect in everybody, but how we process it, how long it stays in us, how strong that effect is, what side effects we get, all of those are pretty individualized. So even if every one of the shots was the same, individuals would react differently to it, and so therefore there would be a considerable amount of variability in who would have a side effect and who wouldn't. Okay? Now, that's on the patient side of it. On the shot side of it, there was a lot of variability. Many of us suspected that just with the number of doses they were pumping out in a given time frame. But as time has gone on and documents have been released and information is starting to flow a little bit better, we're realizing that, yeah, that was likely the case. And that happened again in two main ways. Number one was the active ingredient. Some shots had very little or no active ingredient, and some shots had presumably double or triple the amount of active ingredient. Likewise, there were contamination issues. Some shots were very clean with no contamination whatsoever, and then others were almost like dishwater put in a vial. So significant variability from batch to batch, depending on where it was made, how it was made, when it was made. So when you take that into consideration, the variability in the shot itself, and then the variability in how people would react to it, you can see very quickly that not everybody is going to have the same reaction, both on the side of gaining antibodies and some protection, and on the side of side effects and complications later on down the road. So get that out of the way right up front. I'm not saying that everybody that got the shot is going to have the problems we're discussing today. I would say the highest estimate I've read so far is about 3%, maybe estimated up to 3 to 5% of the people that got the shot would have something kind of like what we're talking about today. But again, we don't have solid numbers on that because there was so much variability. It's very difficult to get those kinds of numbers. So I don't know that we're ever going to have those numbers, at least not to a degree that we have some confidence in talking about them. Okay, but we're not talking about 90% of the people that got the shot are going to have these issues. That just doesn't seem realistic. There are too many people that are doing fine after this. Now, if you're in a category where you're concerned about having these kinds of issues down the road, where we're talking about a rapid increase in the development of plaques, like someone that's had, a stable 15 to 20% blockage somewhere for several years, they've been watching it, all of a sudden it blows up and it's a 60, 70% blockage, seemingly within a pretty short time frame. People that have clots developing, either what we would call macro clots, like one or two big clots somewhere, or micro clots, which could be tens or hundreds or thousands of little tiny clots throughout your body. either of those situations. And then myocarditis, inflammation of the heart muscle itself, which can cause some scarring, and that can affect electrical conduction farther on down the road. So things like that are what we're discussing, or what I'm discussing today. So a couple of things you can do, or a couple of things I'm going to talk about that are likely relatable to this. Let me put it that way. First is a substance called nattokinase, Natto kinase, Kinase. Anything with ASE on the end of it generally is going to be an enzyme. Enzymes break things apart into component pieces. They're disassembling things. So nattokinase comes from soy. They take soy, they ferment it with a bacteria called Bacillus natto, Natto, that's where it gets its name. And then from that fermentation product, they extract the enzyme nattokinase. Now, what nattokinase does in particular, compared to a lot of other enzymes, because we have enzymes we use to digest our food and all kinds of things. But this particular one is very good at breaking down fibrin. Now, fibrin is the substantive component of blood clots, and to some degree plaques in our vascular system. So when nattokinase is introduced, it supports your body's natural ability to break apart clots. Now, it doesn't break them apart into pieces. I would describe it more like melting them away. Picture an ice cube on a warm pan where it just kind of melts away. It's not fracturing it like you broke the ice cube into little pieces. It's melting it away over time. Now, with something like nattokinase, well, let me back up with clots. If I were to cut myself and was bleeding, my body has to have the ability to clot that blood. That protects me from just continuously bleeding until I run out of blood. But once that clot does its job, the bleeding is stopped, the vessel is repairing, the skin is repairing, like I'm progressing through this healing and repairing process. At some point, my body has to go break down that clot and reabsorb it so that I can return to a natural state where the skin is healed, the vessel's healed, the blood is moving, the clot's gone, like I'm back to normal. I'm restored. So we have the natural ability to break down clots. Presumably, with interventions like we talked about in the beginning of this, you could be overwhelmed by clot material because of an inflammatory protein that went through your body and enticed you to create all kinds of little clots or a couple of really big clots. And so your natural ability to break those down and resolve those could be overwhelmed by that. So taking something that would support or enhance your body's natural ability to break those down and resolve those would obviously be pretty important and hopefully pretty effective. So these are not drugs. I'm going to recommend one or suggest one other substance as well here in just a minute. These are not drugs. They're not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, prevent any particular disease. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just looking at substances, compounds, where research has told us that they support certain processes that our body naturally does that would be relevant and helpful for someone who's going through these issues, right? I really want to be careful about expressing that clearly. So nattokinase, a couple of things have recently come up. I'm going to talk about an article here. It was written by Ron Grisanti. He has a lot to do with an organization called Functional Medicine University, and that's who sent me this article. But he's talking about a couple of other research articles in here. These date back as far as 2008, these two articles that he's talking about in here. One of them relates to blood pressure. And this is important because it goes beyond dissolving fibrin or helping your body do that. And it deals with inflammation inside the blood vessels. And that when you had a reduction of that inflammation and when you had, I don't want to call it a thinning of the blood, but a normalizing of the blood so that it's not too thick. It's more normal viscosity. It's not making it too thin. It's just normalizing it. There was a significant decrease in blood pressure in most of the subjects in this particular study. It wasn't a big study. It was 86 people, which by medical research standards is a preliminary study, right? This was not the final study for something like this, but it's indicative. Of those, I think 73 subjects stayed in the study the whole time. Some of those 73 took nattokinase, the others did not. This was placebo controlled. But they had a significant release in blood pressure compared to the people that didn't take nattokinase. So there's one thing. It helps with thick blood not being so thick, and therefore it's easier to move, blood pressure can drop. In a 26-week study, so half a year, 82 randomized volunteers took either 300 milligrams of nattokinase or they took 20 milligrams of something called simvastatin, which is a statin medication, a cholesterol reducing medication. So there was no placebo in here. We were comparing one intervention to another. And they did that every day, like I said, for 26 weeks, so half a year. So long story short, in the statin group, the simvastatin group, they were looking at pre-existing plaques in the arteries. So blockages that were developing, things that you would eventually go in and get a stent for, or if it's bad enough, you would have bypass surgery for something like that. In the statin group, they saw on average, they saw an 11.5% reduction in the size of the plaques that were in the arteries. But in the nattokinase group, which if you extrapolate that out to a year, if it bears out that way, 11.5%, you take the drug for a year, maybe you're looking at just under 25% reduction. Still pretty meaningful, I think. And I was a little bit surprised by that. But in the nattokinase group in 26 weeks, it was a 36.6% reduction in the plaques. And so if you extrapolate that out to a year, which I know gets a little fuzzy, but you're talking about, upwards of a 70% reduction in plaques. That's pretty substantial. So anyway, nattokinase has those abilities. So that's something that I think people should consider if they have concerns for blockages, progressing plaques, inflammation in the vasculature, thick blood, those kinds of things after getting the shots. If you're not worried about it, don't do it. The next one I want to talk about is an extract called rhamnon sulfate, RHAMNAN, rhamnon sulfate. That's an extract basically of like a seaweed algae kind of thing that grows off the coast of Japan. Its claim to fame originally, I think, was a similar effect of dissolving the plaques, melting away plaques in the vasculature. Over time, with research, they found that it also has antiviral properties. It also has anti-clotting properties or blood thinning to some degree properties. It's anti-obesity. It helps you control blood sugar better. It's anti-high blood pressure. So lots of different things, right? Even more than that, but I'm going to keep it kind of to what's relevant for this discussion. So rhamnon sulfate has been used for a while in this realm. It's becoming more popular because a different company has picked up production of it and has now made it much more easily available to practitioners like me. It was studied and showed to have some effects. I don't know how relevant this is to what we're discussing, as degrading or blocking to some degree the binding site on the spike protein for COVID-19. And there were some suggestions that it may prove to be a viable therapeutic product for COVID-19. Now, I didn't see that ever really went anywhere. I think there were a lot of different things that fell into that category, and then I think there were a lot of financial interests that drove the discussion one way or the other. This never really was brought up on a large scale as something that should be used for that. However, in the research that they did, it did show effectiveness against that binding site. That's been brought up by several practitioners, suggesting perhaps that if you've recently gotten one of the shots that would cause your body to produce a large amount of spike protein, perhaps taking something like this shortly after that would maybe soften the inflammatory effect of those spike proteins. I haven't seen research to prove that that works. I think there is a logical, connect the dots kind of chain there, but it hasn't been proven as far as I've been able to find. So suggestion, but not, solid evidence to that. So rhamnin sulfate is another extract that I think would be beneficial. Obviously, if you can put it with the nattokinase, I mean, that's a really nice combination to, I should have mentioned, to heal and repair and reopen and all of that, the vasculature. Rhamnin sulfate also is very well known for decreasing inflammation and supporting the health of something called the endothelial glycocalyx. Very long fancy way of saying the lining of the blood vessels. So it decreases inflammation and increases the health, resiliency, elasticity of the lining of the blood vessels. So when you consider decreasing inflammation in the lining of the blood vessels, increasing the health of the lining of the blood vessels, what it can do for your body's natural ability to handle plaques and clots and blood sugar and spike proteins and all of that, you put that together with what we know about nattokinase, that's a great combination for someone who has concerns about this. Presumably, in people who are vulnerable and got the right kind of shot, there could be a large influx or a large plume of inflammation inside the vasculature and obviously of the heart, because you've been hearing about myocarditis. So if supplements like these can help your body's natural ability to control the inflammation, to normalize those processes, to keep the clots from getting out of control, to soften and degrade the plaques, you may be able to sidestep the major problems from this or slow it down enough that your body can get ahead of it, whatever. But I would be remiss as a practitioner if I wasn't discussing this at large with people that may have these issues. I can talk about it one-on-one in the office, but I can reach many, many more people this way. So I just want to say, if you go to drkrupka.com, you should pretty quickly be able to see an area on the website where it talks about buying supplements. And if you go there, you can link around and find a lot of the research that I'm talking about here, read about it, click on the articles, read the articles for yourself. There's also a website called clotsfromshots.com, all one word, Clots from Shots. And you can find the same thing there. Lots of research presented, quick write-up about these, and links to products that contain these. The products that I use that contain these, one of them is called nattocerezyme. It's got nattokinase and it adds serrapeptidase, which is another very similar enzyme. And then for the rhamnin sulfate, there's a product called arterosil. And both of those are available on my website. Should you want them, you can talk to your functional medicine doctor or your nutrition aware physician or practitioner about whether these are right for you. There are some considerations if you're already taking cardiovascular medications like a statin drug, or if you're taking a blood thinner already, then you may want to be careful about this. There may be some extra precautions you want to take, or you may want to change the dosage a little bit. Last thing I want to say is, with supplements like these in a situation like this, you're not talking days to weeks to make a difference. You're talking months to a year, year and a half. Like I mentioned in one of these studies, it was a 26-week study with a 36+% reduction. You extrapolate that out to a year, you're getting 50, 60, 70 something percent reduction. That's pretty meaningful, but that's not happening in a couple of weeks. Like these are 6-month, 9-month, 12-month, 18-month supplement programs. But what other options do you have? I mean, most of mainstream medicine isn't discussing anything like this. So do your research, follow the links. If you have trouble finding any of these, send me a direct message. I'll send you a link to where you can find the research. Do some reading for yourself. Obviously, for those of you that are my patients, talk to me. I'll be happy to discuss this with you. If you're not my patient, then this is educational information that you need to bring to your functional medicine doctor or your nutrition aware physician. If you talk to your regular family doctor or cardiologist about it, they may just not have any awareness of this whatsoever. If they are a prescribing medical doctor, most of their education, especially current event kind of education, believe it or not, either comes from the same news you're watching on TV or it comes from the pharmaceutical companies that they use on a regular basis, neither of which has any interest in explaining this kind of information to them. So they may just be unaware. It's not what they do. It's like asking your plumber about electrical issues in your home. It's not what they do, right? So find a functional medicine doctor or, like I said, a nutrition aware physician, health coach, something like that. If you have questions about this and want to discuss it, or contact me, I'll be happy to ask you a few questions, review some situations, and see if we can give you a little bit of guidance on this. All right, so I hope that helps you out. Obviously, as usual, if you know friends or family members that would benefit from this information, please feel free to share the link to this. And like I said, I hope that helps you out. As I come across more helpful information for this situation, I'll definitely let you know. Have a great one.